Welcome and good morning, good afternoon to everybody. We're excited to have you participate in today's strategy huddle. My name is Ryan and I'm an account manager for MyStrategicPlan. The purpose of this call, the strategy huddle, is to talk strategy, to talk execution, to address some real-world questions and provide some ideas and actionable solutions. We decided to answer this month's questions on the strategy huddle with more specifics. That's in the form of case study discussion. We're sending out a post-call survey and are really interested in your feedback on a little bit of this change to see if the change is what you're looking for in the specifics on the case study or if a different direction, examples of what you're looking for. So quick ground rules. The presentation is targeted for 45 to 60 minutes. We encourage your participation. If you identify yourself at the topic or a question or have a question, please use the chat box on the right-hand side or raise your hand and we'll open the floor to you. At the end of the call, we will be sending out a presentation with a link to the recording and we'll get that done by the end of the day tomorrow. And it's important just to note that this is not a rehearsed presentation, so we appreciate your patience with some of the slides. Before I hand it off to Erica, I'd like to take a minute to introduce the Strategy Huddle leaders, and that is Howard and Erica. Both are co-founders of M3 Planning, which is a parent company of MyStrategicPlan, and really the brains behind the intellectual property of the system. We launched our redesigned site, and is worth checking out, and that's at m3planning.com. Howard is the president of M3 Planning and has a PhD in marketing with the emphasis on research. A lot of our work on the research side of the business is driven by his direction. Erica is a VP of marketing, the author of Strategic Planning for Dummies, and has several spot training videos on strategic planning, both on our site as well as YouTube. Both Erica and Howard are involved in MyStrategicPlan.com, the system day-to-day, but much of their focus is on the professional service side of the business and are focused on facilitating and are on the road doing that much of the month. With that said, I'll turn the call over to Erica to get this started.
Thanks, Ryan, and good morning, Howard.
Good morning. It is morning here.
It is. Good morning to everybody on the phone. Thanks for that introduction. We are excited to have everybody joining us today, and we thank you for your time in advance. As Ryan indicated, our intention behind the strategy huddles that we hold every month is really to grow and share best practices around strategy and execution, and we're just really passionate about making strategy and execution, these management tools, work in organizations. We know that it's not easy. A lot of organizations struggle with various and sundry components, and some of us out there are figuring it out, and some of us are still running into roadblocks, and that's why we're here to help just share those best practices. We have some really great questions that came in over the month, and we, instead of answering the question directly, we thought we would share some case studies of how some other organizations that we worked with have answered some of the questions that came to us. So hopefully you'll find applicability to these in your organization. Please, however, if you have something you'd like to add, please raise your hand. There's a little raise your hand button under the list of names. There's also the chat box. You can put your stuff in there. If there's something that's on your mind that you'd like some feedback from the group, and that's why it's called the Huddle, we would love to help take your questions at the end on anything that we're talking about or anything that is not on the agenda. So with that in mind, we always share a strategy of the month. Then we'll move into talking about measures and some really just practical, how do we just get the measurement system working in organizations. A case study that talks about strategic alignment, and what I think you'll gain from this is not only if you're struggling with how to align strategy and cascade strategy through an organization, but also how to create a strategy map. We're kind of doing a double whammy with that case study. And then an interesting case study of an organization we're working with right now around changing your business model. So one of the questions came to us is how do you know if you're delivering the right value? And so this was a great tool to use. So, and then we'll leave time for questions at the end. So with that, I'll pass it over to Howard to take us through the strategy stat of the month.
Thanks, Erica. From those that have joined us in the past may note that this stat comes out of an article that we've used before. The Secrets to Successful Strategy Execution comes out of Harvard Business Review in June of '08, and it's like, well, okay, that's 2 years old, and you say, well, why are we looking at this again? I dug into that article a little bit deeper after we looked at it last time, and it's just a real gem. And the cursory discussion on that is the fellow that wrote one of the summaries had been the editor of Harvard Business Review, and he's been the editor of Journal of Marketing, I think, as well. And his point was that he'd been looking for something that was going to kind of rock the strategy world, because nothing had really come out since Porter had come up with his things 15 years ago. And this study was done by practitioners. It was done over a number of years, and it was done based upon what so many of us always question is, okay, we've got this wonderful strategy. Now, where's the reality of performance? How come we're not seeing it delivered into the performance? So they took their expertise and developed this study, and they collected data over a couple of years, and I think they continued after they did pull the data, and they asked questions around 17 different areas, traits of what it takes to deliver the strategy into performance, and then they grouped it into 4 areas, which you'll see on the screen there: information, decision rights, motivators, and structure. And the point, one of the main points that you take away from the article is so much of the time when we see our strategy not coming to reality, we say, okay, we've got to restructure our we have to take these boxes and lines and so forth in our organizational program, and we have to restructure them and make things work differently. And what they found is typically you will get a quick boost, but in the long term, you'll come back to the same issues. So they found, and it was a result of 45,000 profiles, international, big companies, small companies, nonprofit, for-profit, that you will have twice the bang for the buck with the information, decision rights versus motivators and structure. So what that really means is clarifying the decision rights. And a couple of their comments on decision rights the question was, everyone has a good idea of the decisions and actions for which he or she is responsible. It's like a duh, but the point is, vast majority of people don't get it. And then the second highest ranking item under those decision rights is, once made, decisions are not second guessed. Those are 2 primary important things. And then information has to do with make sure the information from the competitive environment from the outside gets in so we can make decisions quickly, and then there's a free flow of information across borders inside of the organization. So what this basically says then is, when we're trying to implement this wonderful strategic plan that we've worked so hard on, had all these meetings and rolled it out and cascaded, if we don't have the information flowing and people don't know what the decisions that they're supposed to be making, chances are that we're just not going to deliver the performance that we're after. So it's really key and foundational, because so much of the time we see in our work, we have to restructure. Oh man, we've got to bump up the compensation plans or whatever to get people to do something. And what this is telling us is that is not the case. Don't waste your money on that. Make sure the right people know what they're supposed to be doing, and make sure the right information is flowing out into the appropriate areas. So again, this is a little more of an explanation about strategy set, but I think this is really key when it comes to strategy. And you can get the article from Harvard Business Review, June of 2008, and the title being The Secrets to Successful Strategy Execution. And again, this is not an academic article. It's written by Bain, which is a leading consulting firm. So with that done, I think we need to start looking at some of these measures to make sure that execution is going along well.
Awesome. Thank you, Howard. So one of the next agenda item, of course, one of the questions that came in was, we're stuck on developing our measures. What are some tips or suggestions you have to create ones that are usable? Okay, so on our MyStrategicPlan website, we have a whole section on the conceptual side of creating performance measures, and And you can find tons of articles on performance measures, books, the whole thing, and they're all great, I'm sure. But we wanted to just share when you're sitting in front of your team or you're trying to create measures and coach people into getting the plan done, and it always seems like establishing the measures and targets are the last thing that gets done because it's just the one that people don't want to do because it's hard to do sometimes, I think. So we just wanted to share, again, some tips and some guidelines that you could use directly, either if you're helping people develop them or if you're having to do it yourself. So first of all, how do you know when you have good measures? What are they supposed to be doing for you? And just some ideas that are on the screen. We kind of get lost, I think, sometimes in the we're supposed to be doing this, we're supposed to have measures. I mean, the old adage of if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Well, that's fine, and I think that we would all conceptually agree with that, but when push comes to shove, we're instituting a pretty serious system in an organization, asking to drive accountability, asking to drive visibility into what is happening in an organization from a strategic perspective. And so not losing sight of that outcome that we're seeking from a measurement system. Here are some guidelines, or not some guidelines, here are some, when we know we have good measures some ideas that are on the screen. It should tell you whether your strategy is working or not. Really a lot of conversation around what's a strategic measure versus what's an operational measure. And while I don't have this on the screen right here, I thought this was kind of a good way to think about, so when we're talking about performance measures related to strategy, we're talking about measures that help us understand whether or not our strategy is working. And yes, as you cascade them down, they become operational. They go from maybe something you look at once a month. If you parse it down from perhaps customer loyalty is something you might look at on a monthly basis, but what's driving loyalty you might be looking at a more periodic basis, maybe on a weekly basis, and that is a bit more of an operational measure that lets you know whether your shipments are on time or there are defects in your product or whatever the case may be. But I think it's important, especially when we look at this, at whether your strategy is working, to differentiate between strategic measures and operational measures. It should focus employees and management boards on what matters most to success. What are we trying to drive for the organization? Those measures should help us provide that dashboard for whether or not we are moving toward that future state we're trying to get to. Empowering the team, providing the information, as Howard mentioned, to actually make course corrections. You can kind of see the others on here as communicating in understandable language. They need to be realistic, and they need to measure the right things. And that sounds pretty obvious as well, but I think sometimes we come up with measures that are really not realistic, that we actually can't get the data for, and so we just need to put in a proxy. And we need to make sure they're verifiable, because most of the time we sync those up with comp, and if we can't make them verifiable, then people get, obviously, understandably, a little bit frustrated. So those are just some ways to know we've got good measures when. Let's look at some guidelines to whether or not your measures are when you're putting measures together, some guidelines to think about whether they are working for you. They should explicitly define ownership. It should be a precise unit of measurement that's verifiable, so I said that again. So it needs to be, if you're doing it monthly, quarterly. The frequency needs to be stated, and the targets need to be realistic, and perhaps some milestones along the way. And I know Howard has a lot of thoughts on this as well. He's been working with a lot of organizations recently in developing effective measures. Anything you want to add on guidelines or what makes them work for you?
Anything? This, interestingly enough, topic has come up quite a few times, and that's one of the reasons we added that to our Strategy Check newsletter last month. And I think we're going to continue on with that because it seems such a simple thing to deal with, and when it comes to real practicality and making it work, it doesn't.
And Howard, I just realized that Ryan put up the poll to ask people if it's working for them.
Oh.
So if you could just have a look, that there's a poll on the right-hand side of your screen, and it's going to be there for just about 3 more minutes, and we'll be interested to see how often you're reviewing your key performance indicators or your performance measures, those that are strategic in nature, and select A through E there, and make sure to hit the submit button. We love to share with everybody here, how often you review your key performance indicators, and that's kind of also an indicator of how well you think they're working for you. So we'll wait just a couple of minutes, take a moment to respond, and Howard, continue on with your thoughts about what makes them good.
What makes them good? One of the key parts of, a number is a number. And so we always sit down, people say, what does this mean? 10%, 40%, 80%. So in relationship, what might that mean to anything? So when you pick a metric, a measure, make sure that you can stay with it for a period of time. So you can start gauging it. What is it doing? You have to have a perspective in which to interpret it, so you can make some good managerial decisions. One way you can maybe do that is to get information from this. There's it's a nonprofit, or not a nonprofit. It's an association called KPIlibrary.com. Folks can join that. They can share KPIs. They can get ideas on what might be happening in a particular industry, so you can have a perspective on what that might be. So that's really important to make sure that we have that involvement. We have the perspective we can move forward and make a difference. And then, as Erica mentioned before, and I want to go on to put another label on, is the lead lag. Erica had mentioned about customer satisfaction is more of a strategic issue, and then we've got some operational things going on inside, and who knows. So the lead lag being a history lesson, and that was basically the reason that the whole balanced scorecard thing came together by Kaplan and Norton about 20 years ago, was that the finances are a history lesson, and the last thing we want to do is get a bad history lesson. We want to make course corrections before we get there. So in your particular organization, if customer satisfaction is a key point, or loyalty is a key item that you're trying to drive, you don't want to wait for the end of the quarter, end of the year, or whatever else, and find out that the number has not gone the way you want it to. What is driving your loyalty, your customer satisfaction number in your particular industry? So like Eric had mentioned, it may be on-time shipments. And if your on-time shipments are starting to drop off, you're going to know way in advance that you're going to have some trouble in that area. So make sure you have the lead lag followed all the way through. And then when you'd mentioned with the KPIs, so much of the time we see when we're working with folks, that because they don't want to take the time to work on things, they will do this completion. Well, I got this thing done. It's 100% completion. That's my measure, and that's not really a good way to come up with a measure. Take time to make sure you put a number to it. If you got any thoughts to that?
I do. I think that it's easy for some people who are maybe advanced in strategic planning and strategic management to put together lead and lag measures. And Howard and I always debate about this just a little bit. My approach is get something going and don't spend months trying to get perfect measures in place, because it's not going to happen. And they're probably going to end up changing anyways. And to Howard's point, leave them in place until they're not working for you and they're not meeting the requirements that we talked about earlier about whether they're telling you if the strategy is working. But sometimes we do have goals or objectives that are project-based. They are completion-based. And so I would submit that sometimes we just need those, because we don't need a perfect quantitative measure to measure everything all of the time. Now, if it's an important strategic activity, we need to make sure, let's go back to customer loyalty, fine. But I just think it's worth giving ourselves a little bit of grace to say, hey, you know what, let's get something going. Let's talk about looking at the status of our strategic direction on a more periodic basis, and if it has to be % complete, so be it. That said, I think one way to push past that a little bit is when you're sitting and, looking at your goal or looking at your objective. I think a great sort of quick tip, takeaway on this is, what is the outcome of that goal or objective? And that really should help you define what the measure is. I just think, what is the outcome? You know, what is the outcome of driving customer loyalty that you're seeking? Is it growing your Tier A customer base? Great. Then the measure should be growth in Tier A customers and the percent that you're trying to grow it. And I think that really, really helps identify and help you move past just percent complete on measures, because why are we doing the project, for example? Okay. So with that in mind, I think we're going to throw up the poll results and see how the rest of your peers, how often you're collectively reviewing your key performance indicators. And while Ryan is doing that, there we go, so we can kind of see. Majority of the folks are reviewing it on a quarterly basis, one person on a monthly, and some semi-annually and annually. Here's a really quick scorecard template, and we're going to move on. I think sometimes it's helpful for those of us that are just learning this for the first time. What is it? How do we actually just start to identify performance measures? So we have our corporate objective. Perhaps we're identifying measures for our departments. This is actually a department scorecard. The measure, what are we measuring? The target, the numeric value, is it annual, monthly, or quarterly? Where is the data coming from? And then there's the frequency. So what's the measure? What's the numeric value that we're measuring, the target? Where's the data coming from? I think that's a really helpful thing to identify. And then what's the period and the frequency in which we're tracking that data. So just wrapping up on this subject, here are just some summary actions. Identify the right measures. I really think it's important, back to those initial things that we talked about, it needs to tell the strategy story, measure what counts and what matters to your organization, establish increments that mesh with the targets, i.e. if we can't get the data monthly, then we get it quarterly, so make sure the increments mesh with the data, or with the targets and the timing that you can get the data. Identify the data source, determine your collection tool. You're using an Excel spreadsheet. We have an online system. There are a lot of other online systems. How are you going to collect the information? Who's responsible for that? And then checking it out each quarter to make sure that those measures are telling you something about the strategy. So with that, we'll move on to a case study related to the Boy Scouts, and it is based on some questions that came in around strategic alignment. How do we drive alignment? And I think this is a really interesting case study, and Howard's going to take us through this.
It is definitely very interesting. The topic is important for the Boy Scouts or a lot of nonprofit organizations from the standpoint is how does information from the lead organization, how does that translate down into the actual operational areas and so forth. And the Boy Scouts have been around 100 years, and every 5 years they revisit their strategic plan, and this particular time they started working on the plan probably well over a year ago with a group of volunteers as well as professionals on the national front. Everybody's kind of understanding of the Boy Scouts, and they know it's been around. It's been a major impact, and they were looking at the transition into this new centennial for them, and what they should be really be doing different and so forth. So they're trying to be leading the national vanguard and what's happening. So we've got then over about 300 councils that are then trying to determine, how do we fit into this whole thing? How do we kind of follow behind, and how does this thing work together so we can make sure that we're providing what following in the direction of the national. So that's the reason that we're looking at what we have right here, just to give it an idea of how this organization is kind of put together. So we've got the national grouping, so to speak, the national office, which is located in Dallas, Texas, and so forth. And there's quite a few people that are there working with volunteers as well as working with professionals to establish the directions of day-to-day operations. Inside of that national, then there's a number of different departments, divisions. Depends upon where you may be. In this particular one, we're looking at what's called the operational side of it, the council operations. They then provide a lot of support and direction and so forth, and that rolls down into support areas be involved both volunteers and professionals, and eventually makes its way down to the actual operations of the councils, which are located throughout the United States.
So just to be clear, what we're looking at here is the larger circle is just the national organizations, the national organization. We'll be looking at the strategy map for the national plan. We'll then be looking at the plan, the subset of it, of how it's actually rolling down into a specific department. In this case, we're going to be looking at council operations. Then so there's tight alignment here, obviously. And then we'll be looking at some loose alignment, which is the councils, as Howard indicated, which, for those of us that don't know a lot about the Boy Scouts, which I didn't, it is essentially a set of 300 franchises that have the ability to do what they want, but they do like to align with the national direction, but they don't have to, hence the dotted line. And that is the structure that's over on the right-hand side, and we'll be looking at a strategy map on how we created that loose alignment. So with that, Howard, take it away.
All right. Thanks for clarifying that. What we see now is the national map, and they try to look at about a 5-year timeline, because they feel that's what they can get their arms around as far as looking at what they might be able to impact for the future. And again, like I said, this took well over a year to develop, as you can imagine, working with volunteers as well as professionals that get all the appropriate input from people that were actually in the field, mid-level managers and so forth. So that process did develop then into a plan that, as the Boy Scouts call it, they have 7 pillars. And you can see the pillars. You want to highlight those pillars, Erica. They're like, we call them priorities. You might call them a strategic priority, strategic initiative. I like the Boy Scout term called pillars, because they see these are foundational activities which they have to have in place to move forward over this next 5 years. The pillars, or the priorities, then developed into objectives, and those objectives are those boxes that you'll see under each one of the pillars. And then the objectives that provided the structure to come up with whatever the national council or the national office goals were going to be to make that happen. In this case, the Boy Scouts have 100+ goals in place, very aggressive. They feel that there's a lot of things that they would definitely like to accomplish. So these goals then provided, as they rolled down the structure for, like as Erica mentioned before, the departments, the council operations, and provided the kind of the loose structure for what's going to happen down at the council level. So where did this all come together? Why are we even using this and so forth? When the Boy Scouts developed their plan, we had to try to come up with a format to be able to communicate it throughout the organization, throughout down to the council. And we believe in principles at M3 Planning, and we went back to what the basics of strategy is all about. With Kaplan North came up with a balanced scorecard. Without the balanced scorecard, without a balanced holistic strategy, what do we really have? So from that, we took their plan and balanced it out with inside of the balanced scorecard, and you could see there's the 4 areas. The top area, because this is a nonprofit organization, it's in the area of their outcomes. Or it could be when you're looking at this balanced scorecard, it could be the market activity. The next, the purple, is what's that label on there, Erica?
Organizational management.
Organizational management, and then we've got the people piece, the talents management, and then the way we typically work with nonprofits is the fiscal area is the basis for providing the launch pad and making sure everything is in place to go forward. So we took the 7 pillars. They, as you would imagine, they fit well within the balanced scorecard process, and that way we're able to communicate it better. So that's the national level. So then we've got, as we've noted earlier, there's a number of departments or divisions inside of the national organization. So how do they fit into this particular thing? How can they cascade their activity and support what's being put together by the national leadership team? So in this particular department, it's called Council Operations, you can see that there's much fewer boxes. And these, and what the leadership of the department did was determine which of the council or national council or the national goals that they were going to support, and selected those, and that was the driving department level type goals for them to come underneath and make happen. So they have far less to work with, but somewhere between all the departments at the national, you'll find that the national plan is all supported in various and so many different ways. Do you have a comment did you like to make on this one?
No, I think it's just important because we're used to looking at this quite a bit, just to reiterate that the pillars are the items that, like, say, impact on participation, and then, of course, the goal statements are the ones that are in the boxes. In this case, we didn't change the goal statements, but they're aligning, of course, with the national, and they're stated in the council operations goals that support the national goal. But this is a very specific structure we chose to select from a strategy map production perspective. Instead of creating a different map, one thing that was really important for us with the Boy Scouts was consistent communication and very, very consistent framework. So you could absolutely see, if I go back a slide, you go from the big plan to a subset of the plan, and people were really understanding that alignment, which I think was really powerful. So that's the tight alignment. Let's look at the loose alignment.
The loose alignment is, in one respect, they're guidelines, and that was a major transition for the Boy Scout operations. In that we're trying through the strategic planning process push down the decision-making into each of the individual geographic areas, because that's a context in which they have to be made. And so instead of having this exact goals and objectives, whatever you'd like to term it, that have to be accomplished, you have to make the interpretation based upon how you want to deliver towards the vision of impacting the youth in your area. So what we continued with the cascading using the balanced scorecard, and each of the councils have their own vision, and primarily the mission is the same throughout all of Boy Scouts, which makes sense because that's their foundational purpose and reason they're around. And the council operations are different than national, which as you can imagine, because this is like a franchisor-franchisee relationship. But you'll notice that the top activity has to do with what they're delivering, top perspective. They deliver programs and services to the Scouts, and that's the reason that they exist. Then we have operational excellence, and of which they have three areas that we focus on. Those are the purple boxes. Again, the direction comes from national. And then to the people piece, or as we've labeled them here, the talent management, we have both professionals or people that are on payroll, and then we have the volunteers, and that's the same thing that we have with national. And then the foundational piece, which is the same here, which is as national, we have to have a financially viable, sustainable organization. So at each individual council, if they develop their own goals within this structure, they will be supporting the national plan. And they're delivering, like any good strategy is developed, it's based upon what's going on in their environment. So they're mandated to do the best they can in their area, and if they do that, then they're supporting the national, and they aren't aligned with it, so therein lies the kind of the transition that they're in alignment with and not necessarily have specific items that they have to meet each and every year. The next slide shows you a quick representation Erica, you want to speak to this, how we use this?
Sure, and I just think it's important that what you saw earlier is exactly this, but this is just a brochure that we put together and distributed at the national meeting to thousands of volunteers. And so the strategy map does a lot of things, right? It should tell the strategy story of the organization, to show the interrelationships. Yes, this is not the most complicated strategy map you've ever seen with the arrows going everywhere, but for purposes of this organization, this really works for them. It also needs to explain what the heck it is we're doing from a strategic perspective and the direction that we're going, and it needs to make sense to people visually. And so I think that's another really good thing about a strategy map. The second thing that was really important is the councils wanted to know how they aligned. Yes, it's loose alignment, but they still felt really strongly about aligning with the national direction. And you can see the correlation. On the left-hand side is the national map, and on the right-hand side is the council map. Same thing you saw before. It's just actually in a pretty brochure kind of way, and it really resonated from a structural perspective for people who are not necessarily upfront and personal with strategy, but want to understand where the strategic direction of the organization is going. So I just think it was really powerful, and it was really well received. So a couple steps that were taken as some summary actions.
The main point that I want to pull from here is that we had to find a tool, basic principles that would work throughout, and we went back to the balance. No, we didn't go back, but because we base all of our work on it. But the balanced scorecard framework made best sense, was able to communicate and align everything throughout the organization. We were able to sync the national strategy using that, and it definitely provide the alignment through the national, as well as then bringing the councils to be able to see how they all fit. So in one respect, it's elusive, it's needed, but it provides the guidelines for the councils to make the decisions that they need to make, particularly as we're transitioning into a whole new environment. The world is changing around so quickly, and we have to be able to interact and work at the local level. And I must say that it's been a great opportunity working with the Boy Scouts. It's fun. It's a challenge. Many of our organizations working with them, and we're planning on a long relationship, being able to support them in implementing strategy and impacting the youth. What I'd like to, into this transition, into the next key topic in strategy here is to pass this on to Erica. But the thought that came to me was, I was just mentioning, because the local environment is changing so rapidly, and the Boy Scouts have to be prepared to make quick decisions in the business world, as well as our environment is just changing so rapidly because we're in a flat world anymore. And our business models are really being called into questions. We have to be able to make sure that we are really delivering the value in this new, rapidly changing environment we find ourselves doing battle in. So, Erica, how do we change if we're not doing it right?
Well, I don't know it's not that it's not right, it's just that things are changing, right? And so I think it's a strategic question to be asking ourselves, if we're delivering the value that we are saying that we're delivering, that customers are asking us for. And this is a standard business model diagram that you can see on the screen. I wanted to share this because I think that asking yourself the question at the beginning of a strategic planning process, or maybe it's a strategy refresh or whatever, is our business model changing? Is a pretty fundamental question. And I think we miss that sometimes, and I have to say in the case study that I'm going to share with you right now, we missed this question. I missed this question with this particular client. And maybe because it didn't surface the way that it might have surfaced, it just didn't jump out like it should have. But we kept running into kind of, we needed the answer to the business model question before we could actually go into the planning process. And so I think it's important to just put that in the back of your mind as a tool to say, sometimes we need to ask ourselves, is our business model changing? And what do we mean by a business model? As Howard mentioned, the business model is a way to describe or explain how we deliver our value proposition to our customers. what is happening from an infrastructure perspective? What do we have to have in place in order to deliver the value proposition, and who are we delivering that value proposition to the customer? And then what does it look like from a cost structure and a revenue stream perspective? And it's a strategic management tool that is an analysis tool, and so that's the purpose of it. It's not the end in of itself. If you decide to change your business model, it is perhaps the use of this as a structure to help you think about the question. So. And to Howard's point, how we're delivering value is constantly being called into question, and what customers are asking of us is constantly being called into question. And new business models are emerging all over the place about how you go from idea to delivery is changing faster than most organizations can keep up with it. So let's look at this organization's example, and we're just going to keep it anonymous because it is a case study, and I really don't feel at liberty to share the name. So we just looked at the business model diagram. Let's look at how we facilitated the actual decision about this. So what you're seeing on the screen, I'm going to take a moment to describe, is this is a case study of a church. On the left-hand side, one of the business models is attractional, meaning the mega church model that we're all familiar with. On the other side of the screen, on the right-hand side, is the missional model, which is where the church is actually distributed in small pods, throughout a community, a region, state, the world. And this is purposely pushed, it's purposely stark, being 100% one way or being 100% another way. And then along the spectrum, you can see what is shown here is I said, okay, well, let's get some feedback on where, and this was a facilitated exercise we did, where does the group, where does the 20 folks in the room think we are right now from a business model perspective? Are we 100% attractional? Are we, and then moving up the spectrum, 80% attractional and 20% missional? Are we 60-40, so 60 attractional, 40 missional, and that's where the pink little stickies are. And then at the very top is 50-50, half attractional, half missional, and then over on the other side, more missional or more. And so the first question I asked the group was, where do you think we are today? And that's what the pink sticky notes are. And then I asked the group, where do you think we need to move the church? Where do we think we need to be in the future in 5 years? And that's what the yellow sticky notes are. And so what's interesting about this, of course, you can see, obviously, this particular church is a mega church. They are implementing the attractional model currently, and the majority of the room thought they should move to somewhere on the spectrum more towards missional. Now, what's important about this particular thing was we needed a consensus, we needed an understanding, an anonymous understanding of the ideas in the room, because this is a fundamental shift in how this church does business. And I will just say how they do business, because they're an organization and they have to pay for the services they deliver, and I know they're a nonprofit, but nonetheless, they do business, right? So I think it was a very gutsy question that we asked. It called a lot of people's emotion into. It took 6 months to actually ask this question. And even still, there was one individual in the room that really thought this exercise was stupid, and his sticky notes are at the top of the diagram. He just didn't want to play because it was too threatening to him. And so I just think it's a very, very big deal to kind of go down this road in some cases. So that was the tenor of the group. What did this do for us? This gave us an understanding of what people were thinking in the room in an anonymous way, and the fact that we do indeed have a business model question on our hands. So let's look at this business model specifically. Here's the attractional model. So here's and this is just them. So and how they might execute, or how they're currently executing the business model of attractional. So here's our business model diagram. And in the infrastructure area, our core capabilities include, and we're just having a minor technical challenge here. Hold on just a minute. There we go. So the offer or the value proposition is why do people come to a mega church? Is, I think, being part of a big corporate body of like-minded individuals. Being in a big congregational gathering with hundreds or maybe thousands of people. I'm singing and dancing, and that's the value proposition of and there's more to it than that, but that's one of the value propositions of a mega church. On the infrastructure side, What does that look like? Maybe 2 to 4 church campuses. Who are we partnering with? Perhaps some overseas churches. So what I mean by that is most of the time, we don't just have a big big church campus. We also have some mission outreach, and we're normally partnered with some overseas churches. What are the key activities that we have? We need to be able to have large services. We're essentially producing events. We have a Sunday school. And what is the cost structure? We got to support facilities, and we need to support staff to do so. And there's probably some other ones, but those are some significant cost structures that this model has. Who are we serving over on the right-hand side? It's kind of a baby boomer model a little bit now. I'm being a bit stark about this. Obviously there's a lot more folks in the congregation than just baby boomers, but it is the model that sort of came out of that generation. How do they want to be served? I call it front desk service. And the congregants expect somebody to answer the phone, somebody to be at the front desk, somebody to greet them and talk to them and hand out the pamphlet on Sunday and to manage the Sunday school schedule and the church picnics and all that jazz. And kind of having build it, they will come from a distribution perspective. People will come to us. The revenue streams, they look like big congregational offerings and endowments, fundamentally. So let's look at the missional model. What's the value proposition under the missional model? Well, it's being part of a small, intimate, relevant community, and I said of believers. So, again, whatever your belief system is, but it's about the community-mindedness of it and being small and intimate. And you're probably sitting on the phone saying, well, you could actually do that in an attractional model too, and you're right. So I'm being stark about this. Obviously, we're not doing one direction or the other totally, but just to make the point. We're leading with this particular value proposition as opposed to the other one. So from an infrastructure perspective, this is a big deal. Instead of having massive campuses, we would need to transition into I call it a distributed communication network of hundreds of locations, maybe held in schools and people's homes and universities. It's very different than actually supporting buildings. Who are we partnering with to make this happen? Now, again, you might do this in the attraction model too, but just to be clear, one of the things this church talked about was, maybe they would actually go in and help churches that were dying and re-energize that church instead of starting a new one. I thought that was a really interesting idea, and partnering in that way. Other nonprofit community groups. One really cool thing that this particular church is doing right now that is kind of moving to the missional model is they had a group of young adults move into a low-income area in their particular city, and they moved there. I mean, they moved into the project, and their missional church, if you will, is actually providing meals every day to the folks in the area that don't have meals. But it's not a big soup kitchen. It's not a big undertaking. They're just doing it from their kitchen, and that's what they're doing. So. And there you go for the next item. Some key activities is the community building that I just indicated, and outreach. That's a bit different than having skill sets around event production. That's a different thing. So what's the cost structure for this model? Is the technology. In order to support a huge network of churches, obviously the technology is pretty important. And I just called mobile systems. Maybe it's mobile PAs or however whatever you need to support. The Sunday services in hundreds of locations is different. So who are we serving? Who's our target customer in this model? Now, again, I'm being stark about this, but it's certainly being driven a bit, and it sure is in this church, from the Gen X generation and the millennials. This is something that's resonating much more for that group. From a customer relationship perspective, they're really looking at they want communities. They don't need the front desk person. They want the customer relationship is the community and the co-creation of the service. The distribution channel is certainly meeting people where they are. So i.e. my example of this young adult group of people actually just moving into the project and that being their church. And so how are the revenue streams different? Well, perhaps they're small offerings because the churches are small, and perhaps fundraisers. Maybe the endowment component is the what would I say, the move for that's not as strong. That might not be the case, but again, I'm kind of just making the point. So just thought it was really interesting. You can kind of see the strategic question related to, is the business model changing? And if it is, that is sort of a pretty important question to ask yourself that helps you in your planning or in adapting your planning. If it's no, just keep it in the back of your mind. So I think there's some really great work in this area, tons of workshops on business models, and there's a gentleman who's doing great work on it, and he's created what's called the Business Model Canvas, which is what you just looked at now in the model, but it's actually some white boxes. And you can find it on Wikipedia. We'll add it to the link that we'll send you with this recording, but you can find it on Wikipedia if you just type in Business Model Canvas, and the guy's name is Alex Osterlander, and I'm butchering that. He's Swiss, but some really great work he's doing in this space. So if it's resonating with you might check his stuff out. So with that, we had a pretty beefy set of information today. Howard, is there anything that you'd like to add on any of the subjects we went through? And while you're doing that, Ryan, we'll see if there's any questions from anybody that's on the line today.
I think, in the essence of time, we've really dove deep into it, but I just would to reiterate the fact that a lot of our discussion came from principles and stuff that we've used in the marketplace, and go back to the PowerPoint and you can get the information for the resources and so forth for them. I think there was a lot of good information there.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. And again, our goal is to help answer some questions and forward some best practices and thinking and stuff that's working and not working. So, Ryan, any questions from our participants today?
We had three different questions, but they all have a similar in tone, and it goes back to the Boy Scout case study, Howard, and it basically was talking about the questions had to do with going from the tight organization to a loose organization with that many companies or franchises that you're working with, hundreds. And I believe in this case, is it 300?
300.
Yes. How do you go about that undertaking, whether it's that many or if you scale it down to just a handful? How do you go about that, attacking that? That's kind of the tone between the three questions.
Like deploying it across 300?
The execution, deploying it, exactly.
That's a good question.
You want to go for it?
Sure. So I think that's a really interesting question, and that's something, to understand that it's a pretty big change management initiative for the Boy Scouts.
Yes.
Yeah, and certainly the scalability of it is what the team at National is working on. So the way that they solve that problem is by creating a group within the national organization, within the Council Operations Department, that is essentially an inside set of consultants that is providing different levels of strategic management services to the 300 councils. And one of those services is actually using our online tool, which is cool. We're excited, of course, about that. But the goal for them is to provide the best practices, the tools, and the structure to all 300 organizations with an understanding that they're not all, they're not all the same. Some are big, some are small, some are sophisticated, some are not sophisticated. And so right now, that organization, and we are working with them to support that, is working through the deployment of this structure into the 300 councils. That's sort of what they would call different service levels. So from do-it-yourself to actually going in and facilitating that process. And one of the cool things that they did, though, was that they are pairing up each and every council who wants it. Again, this is voluntary, with a coach, let's just call it for our purposes a strategic planning coach, to help them work through the process. Is a little bit to train the trainer, and they're the subject matter experts, and that also in and of itself is a pretty big deployment effort. So, good question on those three folks. Sure, Howard, take it away.
Thought popped into my mind when I talked with Eric. Part of the brilliance in it, I take it this from the lead from the national office, was the actual developing of the guidelines at the council level. What are the key strategic activities that need to be in place for a council to be financially sustainable, for a council to be successful? And that was developed by the Council Operations Department, and so that you could see that in the generic plan, and we package that up into the balanced scorecard, which then provides the guidelines, and all councils need to look at those and make sure that those activities are being performed well at their level. How they're performing them is based upon their local environment. What they have to do is dictated or directed, I should say, by national. How they do it makes all the difference in the world to impact youth at their particular geographical area.
So with that, and we're almost close to the top of the hour, we're going to wrap us up. The next huddle will be July 28th. As always, please submit your questions in advance. We would love to hear what's on your mind. Just pop us an email at admin@mystrategicplan.com. We will be sending out a recording and the slides from today. And if you are interested in being a strategy leader, please do let us know. We'd love to host you. If you want to share something, a case study anonymously or not anonymously, as the case may be, we would just love it. We've got really great feedback from our strategy leader from last month. We do have a strategy leader joining us next month who will be talking about sales strategy and connecting a sales strategy with business strategy. So we're pretty excited about that.
Good.
So please do join us at 9 o'clock next month on July 28th. As always, thank you so much. We really appreciate everyone, and have a great rest of the week. Take care.